that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello, everybody. Trying a different angle, so I'm not like Two-Face with like half darkness. It's kind of working out better. Think I'll keep it like this. I don't know. Welcome to my Don Quixote thoughts part 2, and in this part 2, we basically finished the first book. Now I know when you buy Miguel Cervantes' Don Quixote, it is in one package. It is one novel. It will be in every case when you acquire this book. But originally, it was 2 books. We had this part, which came out, and then there was this whole controversy where somebody basically kept writing Don Quixote, a sequel story, but was not Cervantes. And so this came out, or well, not this, but the next things we'll discuss basically came out 10 years later, and it was a rebuttal to all that fan fiction that was essentially being written about Don Quixote. And he's like, nope, this is the official sequel. But as for the original tale of Don Quixote, we finish it here. And as for my thoughts on this first book, non-spoiler wise, I guess, I don't know if I loved it as much as the first part. I mean, I don't know if I really loved the first part either. I enjoyed my time with it. It definitely, again, comes across more educational to me than necessarily like, oh, I'm enjoying every second of this. Do I enjoy Don Quixote and Sancho Panza's, sort of just dumb fun they get into? Yes, of course. Every time Don Quixote talks, I'm having a fun time. But there's also, like, amidst all this, I know there's a lot of literary things to it. Like I said, I've been watching. There are free 2009, which, for a reference point, I was 8 years old when these lectures were recorded. But there are Yale videos on Don Quixote, which I've been watching alongside my reading. It's amazing how, if I was being forced to do this in school, I'd probably be hating it. But now that I'm doing it of my own accord, the seeking of knowledge comes freely, where I actively seek it. So I'm watching those videos and stuff on it. So I know there's a lot going on here throughout the entire novel, whether it be historically, whether it be with the literariness of what's happening. I understand that, but there is a lot of confusing weirdness as we get into stories within stories. I mean, this happens in other places too. I reviewed Hamlet, and within that you have the play that he's putting on to see his stepfather's, his uncle's reaction to the play to see if he's guilty or not or whatever, right? And that's a whole fake story within the story, but within that we get a couple things here, from like this romance to this other story, and so all that kind of gets muddled and muddied within this story of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. But in between that, we have these separate stories that don't really have anything to do with Don Quixote specifically. They do have a lot of literary merit, and there's stuff that's being explored there, but it's just not, what I was promised when I picked up the book, which is Don Quixote and Sancho Panza palling around, talking the stuff, So I think that's where it didn't lose me. A lot of that I actually quite enjoyed, like the romance section, like that whole like fake story. I actually really enjoyed that. Just in terms of like, if this was all there was of Don Quixote, I probably wouldn't be a fan of it. But I know that there's a part 2, and in that part 2, things get a little bit more serious, a little bit more dour. So, that as a whole package, I might really appreciate this work. What I do foundationally appreciate about this story is Don Quixote is, I think, pretty definitively by the end of this story, like, insane. In terms of, he read a bunch of tales, and he tried to enact that into reality. Much like if we watched like a bunch of films or read a bunch of books, like I don't know, Lord of the Rings, for example, or name off your fantasy or whatever floats your boat, and we try to enact that sort of valor, that sort of justice, that sort of liberty in the real world, where things aren't as simple and people tend to not be as virtuous as they are in a lot of those old stories. We don't really have an Aragorn, typically, in our day-to-day. The world is a lot more like Game of Thrones, The Song of Ice and Fire, than it is like Tolkien, but it's the ideal of Tolkien that we strive for, despite if it's not realistic or it's not how most humans interact. But that's how we should act, right? And that's that striving that we search for in those stories, that we hope for a better future because we hope to achieve half the measure of greatness, of integrity, of moral clarity that those characters represent. Right? And so the same way, in this story, Don Quixote has read a bunch of fiction and has fallen in love with this idea of a knight and is going through this story trying to be that, even though he's just silly. But he's also the wisest one in the room. On the one hand, he's an absolute moron, mistaking windmills for giants or wine presses for demons or whatever. But at the same time, he's the smartest one in the room, because in a world that doesn't care about justice anymore, that doesn't care about integrity, he provides that at every opportunity. It may come from a delusion, but maybe the delusion is more real if it means that he's living life truthfully. And you make a bigger thing here. If somebody believes that the Earth is a globe and not flat, because they read a Spider-Man comic where he went to space and you got to see the globe, the man or woman reading that Spider-Man, Superman, pick your favorite hero story where they go to space and they see the planet, right? Sure, they didn't get it from a scholarly source, right? So the way they got to that information would be really dumb and convoluted and silly, but they would not be wrong in the conclusion that they've made that the world is round, right? So in a sense, with Cervantes and Don Quixote, the ideals, the morality, the integrity that he presents to the world, maybe it comes from a false place of all these fictional stories. But to him, it's reality. To him, it's truth. But he truly, actively lives that out on the page. So at the end of the day, does it really matter if the stories he read were fake? If in true reality, he lives his life accordingly? And you could even say the same thing if you want to go deeper with religion. Whether or not it's true or not, I'm not here to debate with you today. But, and I know there's a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of evil within like the church and stuff. You got what's the thing that people always immediately throw at with the Catholic Church and popes and the priests and touching little boys, right? But that's, of course, going against the text of the Bible, which would not condone such a thing. If you want to think of the Bible as like, yes, diddle kids, and then the priest does that, and it's like, oh, well, you're doing exactly what the Lord commands, but no, you're going actively against something you claim to believe in, right? But even, the most staunch atheists, if they're really honest with themselves, I think a lot of people, the virtues that they show from that faith that they have is stronger than a lot of people that aren't. And vice versa for people that aren't religious. But again, that's the central thing. Regardless of where you get your conviction from, whether that be from secular humanitarian efforts or from a biblical source or from this or from that, what doesn't matter internally where you receive these things, so long as externally you remain consistent and provide that level of integrity and morality to your everyday circumstances. You see what I'm saying? And I think no matter how I feel about the text itself, like, again, I'm not reading it and be like, oh boy, I'm having a time of my life. And that's okay. Not every work needs to do that for me. But what it does provide is this sort of clarity. And I'm really upset and scared for this second half because I know things are going to go even worse for Don Quixote and his morality and his faith in this ideal of being this knight errant who helps people. It was going to be crushed and crushed and crushed down as reality comes upon him and wakes him up to the truth. But maybe his delusion, his reality, was better than the reality we all share. Maybe his ideals were something that other people should strive for. Sancho starts out very skeptical of this man, but he seems to be quite into the BS by now. But is it BS? Or is Sancho realizing, like, even if this guy's whacked out of his mind, maybe in his own twisted way, he's more real than half of these people we interact with. And I think that there's a beauty and a transcendentness to that speaks to the story immensely powerfully. And I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. So in that respect, I absolutely adore that aspect of the tale. Reading it minute by minute may not be the most enjoyable thing for me personally ever, but I do appreciate it as a whole, just thinking about it after the fact. Even if when reading it, it's not necessarily the most engaging thing ever. There are parts where it's super engaging, but I definitely don't find the whole thing to be, which is fine. I don't need every work to do that. So I think thematically I've explained my process on this first book of Don Quixote, the first half of this novel. So I think I'll leave it there non-spoiler wise. There's a reason we still talk about Cervantes or Chaucer or Dickens or Jane Austen or Shakespeare, right? Like, these will endure and go on for all time. I mean, Don Quixote, right? The crazy man who's apparently wise. I mean, I started with Star Wars, right? The expanded universe. That's like how I really got into this whole booktube sphere. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, all different forms of Don Quixote. I mean, Yoda begins in episode 5 by acting like a kooky guy who's actually full of wisdom and shows a world greater than just the reality that Luke perceives. In the same way, or in a similar way, Don Quixote may be actually more insane than Yoda, may actually be false in his beliefs, but the transcendent world that he provides through that filter is actually just as strong as the Force. The Force is just an objective scientific reality in Star Wars, especially due to the prequels. But Don Quixote, again, serves a similar purpose in a metaphysical, theological is the wrong word, philosophical ideal. But of course, I think it's worth your time. You thought I was going to say it's a piece of garbage. I'm not going to say that. It's Don Quixote. It's Cervantes. It's good. I enjoyed it. I'm definitely more looking forward to part 2, though, I will say. I think I will really emotionally... the thing about this first half is it's very satirical. It's very funny, right? Although humor is subjective. And while I can appreciate the things that it's satirizing or critiquing or this or that, for me, living in 2026, it's just so far removed from my time that I don't think it can accurately provide me the same sort of humor. Other people, I guess, can. You know, other people have reviewed the same story and have gotten, they're like, it's so funny, it's so great. And I just don't really see that. I don't perceive that. I don't find it particularly funny. I appreciate it, but I don't find it that funny. I believe the second half is going to be a bit more introspective and a bit more philosophical, and I guess I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into that. But I do think it's worth your time, absolutely. So those are my thoughts on the first like 400-ish pages of Don Quixote, the first book of Don Quixote. And if you want my thoughts on the rest, you'll have to stick around to find out. If I'm getting to spoilers, if you have not read up to the 450 or around that page count, basically until part 2 of Don Quixote's story, then if you don't want any spoilers, there's a door. But like I said, I don't really think you can spoil Don Quixote. It's more about experiencing it. But anyway, that's your warning. Moving on. So, first note from my phone. Well, by my faith, Senor Licentia, the man who did that deed was my master, and don't think I didn't tell him beforehand and warn him to be careful about what he was doing, and say it was a sin to free them, since all of them were there because they were great villains. Imbecile, said Don Quixote, it is not the responsibility or concern of a knight-errant to determine if the afflicted, the fettered, and the oppressed whom he meets along the road are in that condition and suffering that anguish because of misdeeds or kind acts. His only obligation is to help them because they are in need, turning his eye to the suffering and not their wickedness. And I encountered a rosary, a string of disheartened, unfortunate people, and I did for them what my religion asks of me. The rest does not concern me, and I say that whoever thinks that this is wrong, accepting the holy dignity of the Licente and his honored person, knows little of the matter of chivalry, and lies like a low-born horse son, and will be taught like this by my sword at a greater strength. So there's that. But essentially, around this part is when Don Quixote frees the captives, which will provide big consequences later on. Because again, in an ideal world, justice can just be served. You can help the oppressed, you can stop the wicked. But reality has laws, regulations, rules. We can't be Batman. We can't go out in the middle of the night and fight bad guys. Even if you did, you would be dubbed a vigilante and would also have a warrant out for your arrest. In much the same way, this will bite Don Quixote in the butt when the authorities come for him for freeing captives that were not his to free. But you could argue, who are this government to enslave these people, regardless of their crimes? Next phone note. Do you think, base wretch, that you will always be able to treat me with disrespect? That it'll always be a matter of your erring and my forgiving you? You are mistaken, depraved villain, something you undoubtedly are, since you dare speak ill of the incurable Dulcinea. Do you not realize, you coarse, contemptible ruffian, that if it were not for the valor she inspires in my arm, I should not have the strength to kill a flea? Tell me, insidious viper's tongue, who do you think has won this kingdom and cut off the head of this giant and made you a marquise, all of which I consider already accomplished, concluded, and finished, if not the valor of Dulcinea, wielding my arm as the instrument of her great deeds? In me she does combat, and in me she conquers, and I live and breathe in her, and have life and being. Hold on, sorry. Oh, foul whoreson, what an ingrate you are, for you see yourself raised from the dust of the earth to be titled Lord, and you respond to this great benefit by speaking ill of the one who performed it for you. Sancho was not so badly beaten that he did not hear everything his master said to him. And after getting to his feet in some haste, he went to stand behind Doritia's palfrey, and from there he said to his master, Tell me, senor, if your grace is determined not to marry this great princess, it's clear the kingdom won't be yours, and if it isn't, what favor can you do for me? That's what I'm complaining about. Your grace should marry this queen for now, and we have her like a gift from heaven. And afterwards you can go back to my lady Dulcinea. There must have been kings in the world who live with their mistresses. As for beauty, I won't get involved in that. If truth be told, they both seem fine to me, although I've never seen the lady Dulcinea. What do you mean you have not seen her, you blasphemous traitor? Said Don Quixote. Have you not just brought me a message from her? I mean, I didn't look at her so carefully, said Sancho, that I could notice her beauty in particular and her good features point by point, but on the whole she seemed fine to me. Now I forgive you, said Don Quixote, and you must pardon the anger I have shown you, for first impulses are not in the hands of men. I can see that, responded Sancho. Just like in me, a desire to talk is always my first impulse, and I can never help saying, not even once, what's on my tongue. Even so, said Don Quixote. Think about what you say, Sancho, because you can carry the jug to the fountain only so many times, and I shall say no more. Well, responded Sancho, God's in his heaven, and he sees all the snares, and he'll be the judge of who does worse, me in not saying the right thing, or your grace in not doing it. I love their dynamic, but also, a thing I didn't pick up in the first part that I definitely did now, and I felt a bit stupid, is Don Quixote has never actually interacted with Dulcinea of Tobosa. He admired her from afar and claims he does everything in her name, which doesn't know who he is. I also didn't realize that Don Quixote is probably a virgin and Bro's like 50. So I think that's interesting. Don Quixote gets accused of actually before that, so the boy, or was that was day 13, sorry, I'm trying to remember where I'm at. Yeah, Don Quixote gets accused of highway robbery for saving those captives. And this is Don Quixote's reply. Robbery to free those in chains, to give liberty to the imprisoned, to assist the wretched, raise up the fallen, secure the needy. O vile rabble, you're low, and base intelligence does not deserve to have heaven communicate to you the great worth of knight-errantry, or allow you to understand the sin and ignorance into which you have fallen when you do not reverence the shadow, let alone the actual presence of any knight-errant. Come, you brotherhood of thieves, you highway robbers sanctioned by the holy brotherhood, come and tell me, who was the fool who signed an arrest warrant against such a knight as I? Who was the dolt who did not know the knight-errants are exempt from all jurisdictional authority, or was unaware that their laws, their sword, their edicts, their courage, their statuses, their will? Who is the imbecile, I say, who did not know that there is no patent of nobility with as many privileges and immunities as those acquired by a knight-errant on the day he is dubbed a knight and dedicated himself to the rigorous practice of chivalry? What knight-errant ever paid a tax, a duty, a queen's levy, a tribute, a tariff, or a toll? What tailor ever received payment from him for the clothes he sewed? What castellan welcomed him to his castle and then asked him to pay the cost? What king has not sat him at his table? What damsel has not loved him and given herself over to his will and desire? And finally, what knight-errant ever was and is or will be in the world who does not have the courage to single-handedly deliver 400 blows to 400 brotherhoods if they presume to oppose him? Regardless of all that, Don Quixote gets caged, put on a wagon to be paraded through the town as somebody to be mocked, somebody to belittle. He meets a man named Senor Cannon, which I think is really funny because, like, canonicity. But Cannon gets, a little bit of sympathy for Don Quixote and tries to rationalize and explain to him why you actually have a really intelligent and smart mind if you just stop believing in this BS. Almost like conversations you might have with an atheist where, like, you're so smart, if you would just drop the Sky Daddy stuff, like, you would be awesome. Like, you could be such a smart guy. But he has this whole dialogue with Don Quixote and tries to convince him that he's like, you have the capacity to be like a really smart, really useful member of society. You just need to drop this whole chivalry thing. He tries to appeal to reason to Don Quixote. And, well, it doesn't work. Again, Don Quixote mentions a lot about the ideals of it and, how much the stories have moved his heart and his soul, and how can that be fake? How can that be false? And within it, he shows like a level of wisdom and understanding, but yet everybody thinks he's insane. But this opening portion of the story ultimately ends with him going back to where it all began in his home. And Sancho being like, oh, well, I guess I don't really have anything to provide you, wife. Sorry that I left for months on end, and I don't really have anything to show for it. And Don Quixote goes back to living in his house, at least for the end of that part one. And so it's kind of like a full circle event. But again, it's the thematic element of maybe Don Quixote is insane, but maybe it doesn't matter because of it's how much he tries to do right that's really incredible about this character. Whether or not he succeeds or not, or fails all the time, is kind of besides the point, because it's the integrity and the persistence to do right that is incredibly endearing about Don Quixote, and everybody laughs at him except for Sancho, and believes him to be a fool, you know. But is he the fool, or is just society as a whole a fool for thinking that him being idealistic is the problem? I don't know. I don't know. Big questions. But I think sometimes I'll just end it with a Superman quote. Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and make us better. And on my soul, I will never stop fighting until my dream of a world where peace, justice, he says a bunch of other things, I forget now, is the reality we all share. I will never stop fighting. Ever. And I think Don Quixote would approve that message by Superman if you were to ever talk to him. And I guess I'll leave it there. And unfortunately for my boy Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, they're going to deal with a lot moving forward. And I hope, after all is said and done, that we'll see if it remains true. I hope Don Quixote, despite the stuff he's going to suffer and endure in this next part, I hope he keeps his delusion. I hope he doesn't let reality win. Because that would truly be something to mourn about the character. But I guess we'll find out in part 2. Until then, thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you with part 3 of my thoughts on Don Quixote. Till then.